standing. Oyez, oyez, oyez. All those with business before this honorable court, draw nigh. The Honorable Richard Stallbrink, LaPorte Superior Court Number 2. The Honorable Greta Friedman, the LaPorte Superior Court Number 1. Forgive me. LaPorte Superior Court Number 1. Got a lot of judges to introduce. Next. The Honorable Pamela Muncy, the LaPorte Circuit Court. The Honorable Erica Stallworth, the LaPorte Circuit Court. The Honorable Jamie Oss, the LaPorte Superior Court Number 1. The Honorable Thomas Alavisos, the LaPorte Circuit Court. The Honorable John Link, the LaPorte Superior Court Number 4. The Honorable William Boatman, Senior Judge, the LaPorte Superior Court Number 4. And the Honorable Jeffrey Thorne, the LaPorte Superior Court Number 3. Ladies and gentlemen are now in joint session. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to LaPorte Superior Court Number 1 and Law Day 2024. Please be seated.
Good morning. I'm Barb Stooksbury, the president of the LaPorte County Bar Association. I'm here with Andrew Volz, who's the vice president of the Bar Association, and unfortunately our secretary treasurer, Tara Wordley, could not be here today as she has a child sick at home. Welcome the members of the bench, the bar, the LaPorte County community to the 2024 Law Day celebration. Law Day is an annual observance in the legal community of more than 60 years. It is a day in the legal community in which we celebrate the law and bring to life the roles of students, the courts, and the Constitution in times of change. The 2024 Law Day theme is Voices of Democracy and encourages Americans to participate in the 2024 elections by deepening their understanding of the electoral process, discussing issues in honest and civil ways, turning out to vote, and finally helping move the country forward after free and fair elections. And that is directly from the American Bar Association. I cannot take credit for that. All right, next we are going to go to the part of the program we're going to do a memorial to those that have passed. We have not had an in memoriam since 2019. Because of COVID, we did not have a normal Law Day ceremony for 3 years, and then last year it was more of an abbreviated form. So today we are going to start. Andrew, if you would please take over the in memoriam section.
All right, if everyone could please stand and give the Pledge of Allegiance. Before we get started with our Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated.
Good morning, all. My name is Andrew Volz, and I am the Vice President of the Bar Association. I'd like to thank your honors for being here today, members of the bar, distinguished guests. As Barb indicated, this has been a long-standing tradition for the LaPorte County Bar Association to provide an in memoriam conversation with regards to members of the bar who had served with distinction, professionalism, and supplied multiple services to the individuals of LaPorte County and beyond. We've got a lengthy list here, and I'm just going to read the names off, and then Do you want me to have them do it at the time that I read the name, or?
You can read the names if you like.
Okay.
We'll have everybody.
All right. So we have certain individuals from both the bar and the bench that are going to make comments with regards to these individuals, but I would ask everybody to rise here at this point, bow your heads for a moment of silence. First individual is Judge Paul Baldoni. His date of death was 12/17/23. Rob Beckman, his date of death was 12/18/19. Don Bogger, his date of death was 12/21/20. Lee DeBeja, 8/27/21. Barbara Friedman, 12/9/21. William or Bill Hedge, 2/19/24. Gene Jones, 8/14/21. Leon Kaminsky, 12/12/21. Steve Cray, 2/15/21. Thomas Pulowski, 8/15/21. Perry Stump, 12/4/20. Martin Alfords, 6/23/23. Tony Walker, 10/26/22. And then the honorary bar member, Marilyn Jones, 4/16/24. We can go ahead and start with the beginning, and you may be seated. Magistrate Link, do you have some words that you'd like to share about Judge Baldoni?
May it please the court, good morning. The Honorable Paul J. Baldoni. Judge Baldoni passed away on December 17th, 2023 at the age of 79. He was raised in Mishawaka, Indiana. He received his undergraduate and law degrees, both from Indiana University. He moved to LaPorte. He joined the law firm of Smith & Smith in the early 1970s. In 1976, he was elected to serve as judge as LaPorte Superior Court number 3. He served 33 years in that position. We believe that he is the longest serving judge in LaPorte County, based upon our current research. During his time as a judge, he served on many committees for the Indiana Judiciary, some of which were, he was a member of the Civil Bench Book Committee. He was a member of the Board of Managers for the Indiana Judges Association. He was a graduate, excuse me, of the Indiana Program for Judges. He was an Indiana Judicial College graduate. He was a member of the Senior Judges Committee for the Judicial Conference, and he initiated the LADS program in LaPorte County. For those of you that don't know what LADS is, it's a program for individuals with alcohol abuse problems. I first professionally met Judge Baldoni in approximately 1995 as a brand new lawyer. I was assigned to his court as a public defender. However, I ran into Judge Baldoni before that when I was in high school, not as a defendant as you're all thinking right now. Judge Baldoni had a program, and in concert with the government class in LaPorte High School, you had to attend his courtroom for part of your grade or credit for that class. Judge Baldoni always had a particular way that he pronounced defendant. He always said defendant, and he emphasized dant. And even to this day, anytime I see that word or I write that word, I hear Judge Baldoni's voice in my head saying defendant. He was deeply committed to his family, to LaPorte County, to the law, and to his community. And he's a When I was in law school, they talked about the giants of the law. Those were people or professors that stood higher than most professors and were considered just to be experts in what they knew. And I consider Judge Baldoni a giant, not only in LaPorte County law, but in the judiciary. And his service to this county is greatly appreciated, and he will be greatly missed. He was a wealth of knowledge and experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. With regards to Rob Beckman, Prosecutor Price.
Thank you, Your Honors. May it please this court, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and thank you for coming. You know, when I think of Rob, I'm oftentimes reminded of Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle were in a vice presidential debate back in about 1988, and Quayle made a point of comparing himself to John F. Kennedy, about how similar they were, and how he could be the same type of a vice president that you would want and comfortable to be president. And Lloyd Benson took offense at that in that debate. He said, "Sir," he says, "I worked with Jack Kennedy. I served with Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was my friend. You're no Jack Kennedy." In the immediate years following Rob's leaving office after 3 consecutive terms, which I think is tied with the most amount of terms that a prosecutor has served, 2 of which he served as the president of the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Association, there was a young neophyte deputy prosecutor who was working as a defense attorney for a brief period of time at that point. And he was boasting about his familiarity, the words that he had heard all about Mr. Beckman and how he could be very intense. He kept referring to Bob Beckman. He was very intense, very intense. And he would regale us with the countenance of all these antics that he had heard about Bob Beckman. And how he would never countenance any kind of antics from any defense attorney. That if necessary, he would go full Beckman on them. To which, in my best Lloyd Benson imitation, I would say, "Sir," or "Son," as Rob would say, I would say, "Son, I worked with and was a good friend of Rob Beckman, not Bob Beckman. And believe me, you're no Rob Beckman." Rob and I shared several things, both being graduates of a law school in Southern California. We both married our wives in Las Vegas. I was honored to work with Rob as a defense attorney and as his chief deputy. As a prosecutor, he truly believed that our job was not to convict at all costs, but rather that we were ministers of justice, and our responsibility was to achieve justice at all costs. The best example of that for me was the wrong person being charged by a previous deputy prosecutor in regards to the slaying of Rena Rison. Rob and I looked at that case repeatedly in the grand jury minutes and came to the conclusion there wasn't a case. Rob stepped forward. He dismissed the charges against that person that was charged. Several years later, towards the end of his term, the correct person was in fact charged, brought to trial, and convicted. Rob was truly an old soul, trapped in a baby boomer existence. The staid and proper lawyer kept a pretty tight lid on his true inner child, but sometimes it poked its head out. It was most pronounced when he performed as the lead guitarist in several rock bands back in the 60s and 70s. And most recently, prior to his demise, as the lead guitar and vocalist in the family rock band, backed by his wife Jo, his daughter Bethany, and his son Kevin. Back in the early 90s, a person by the name of Mark Cohn, he was kind of a one-hit wonder. He charted in the top tens with a song known as Walking in Memphis. A lot of artists, including Cher, tried to cover that song. In my opinion, they didn't do a very good job of it. The best person that ever covered it was Rob Beckman and his family band. Because when I heard the Beckman Tribe's rendition of that song by Rob, I knew there was no other. Not even Mark Cohn, I think, did that good of a job. Because when you heard Rob utter the lyrics, "Son, are you a Christian boy? Ma'am, I am tonight," you truly felt you were indeed walking in shoes 10 feet off of Beale Street at that point. God bless Rob.
Judge Stallring, this is in regards to Don Bogger.
May it please the court, ladies and gentlemen. Don Bogger was born in Warsaw, Indiana on December 5th, 1944. He passed away December 21, 2020. Out of high school, Don joined the Air Force, where he became an air traffic controller. He was stationed in Thailand as an air traffic controller during the Vietnam War. That's one thing I didn't know about him until he died. He was married to his wife Angela for 55 years at the time of his death. Don graduated from Austin Peay University and went to law school at Indiana University Bloomington. He began practicing law in LaPorte, Indiana in 1972, just a short time ago, with Osborne and Lanigan, which would later become Osborne, Lanigan, Rule, and Bogger. Throughout the years, Don and his wife were completely dedicated to the city of LaPorte and LaPorte County. He served as city attorney for LaPorte multiple years, county attorney, solid waste attorney. He was chief deputy prosecutor in LaPorte County. As a city attorney, he served under Mayors Dennis Smith, Kathy Kroback, Lee Morris, and Blair Milo, which serving under 4 different mayors is pretty incredible to be able to do. I first met Don when I first moved back to practice law here in my home county. I was introduced to him by my father, who was a captain in the state police, and he had a relationship with Don way back when Don was a prosecutor. Don was well respected as a person and as a professional. I talked to several people to try to give me quotes about Don, and they all came back the same, and it was all what I experienced about Don. When I practiced against him, or whether he appeared in front of me, I can never say I received an argument or an opinion that was not well thought out and professionally given. He was the ultimate professional and the ultimate gentleman is what I kept coming back, everybody kept telling me. What I also heard from people when I asked about Don, they said Don was a very quiet guy, but he had a very booming voice when he spoke, and he chose to speak. And when he did speak, you better pay attention, because what he said was going to be important. When Don retired, he and his wife had a bucket list of travel. They traveled to many places, yet he still found time to volunteer in his community. And some parting wisdom and advice I received from Don. He and I both served on the fair board together. And when he first got on the fair board, I teased him. I said, "You're retired. Why would you want to take on this very arduous task of putting on a LaPorte County fair?" And his response, I think, is important to all of us here today as we celebrate Law Day. He said, "Your obligation as a lawyer to give back to your community does not stop just because you've retired from the practice of law." Pretty good advice for all of us here today. So Don was a wonderful attorney, a wonderful man, and he is missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Thorne, this is in regards to lead evasion.
May it please the court. Dictionary defines the word unique as, quote, being the only one of its kind, unlike anything else, end quote. As human beings, we're all individuals and therefore unique, but I contend that some people are more unique than others. that would describe Lee W. DeBeja, who was born and raised in Michigan City, educated at Beloit College in Wisconsin, and at New York University as a Root Tilden Scholar, received his Doctorate of Jurisprudence from Indiana University School of Law with honors. Lee was honorably discharged from the United States Marine Corps and completed a 2-year federal district court internship. Lee practiced law in Michigan City for 36 years, retiring in 2001. He served as Chief Deputy Prosecuting Attorney under John Daly. I had the distinct honor and pleasure of practicing law with Lee as an associate and partner from 1978 until his retirement. Lee was a talented and well-respected attorney. Lee represented many high-profile clients during his years in practice and was instrumental in the formation of the Michigan City Legal Aid Society, the Open Door Healthcare Center, LaPorte County Public Defenders Council, and the Michigan City Community Scholarship Foundation, among others. The personal side of Lee DeBeja was a study in contrast. The professional side of Lee always wore a white, starched, French cuff, monogrammed shirt and fairly conservative suits and ties. He always signed documents with a flair, using only a fountain pen with black ink. When he took pleadings to court to be filed, he placed small pieces of paper under the paper clip so as to avoid leaving any marks on the documents. Professionally, Lee was all business, whether in the office or the courtroom, many times to the point of being intimidating. He demanded perfection from himself and expected it from others. I was told by more than one person that employees at the courthouses would get nervous when Lee was in the building, and they would always know when Lee was in the building, as the smell of his cologne would precede him by 3 minutes into any room he would enter. I suspect that some of those who only knew Lee professionally may have felt that he was cold and insensitive. The social Lee DeBeja was exactly the opposite. In social settings, especially at Potawatomi Country Club, Lee was the life of every party. He kissed all the women, hugged all the men, and introduced himself as Uncle Lee to anyone who needed introduction. Lee even had his own drink at Potawatomi. He would just say, "Give me a Diet Jig." Lee wrote with his left hand, but did other things, including playing golf right-handed. He was an excellent golfer, having gone to college on a golf scholarship and having won on several occasions Michigan City Amateur Golf Championship, Potawatomi Club Championship. He finished second runner-up in the 1955 Indiana High School Athletic Association golf tournament as an individual. One day when I was in the pro shop at Potawatomi, I was looking at the list of handicaps, and I saw the name Lee DeBeja. Thank you. There. So anyway, I was at the pro shop and I was looking at the list of people. That one? Thank you. No. There. All right, we'll move that. Thank you. I'm going to get to you later, by the way. Sabotage. All right, I'm still in the pro shop at Potawatomi Country Club. I'm looking at the list of handicaps and I see the name Lee DeBeja, who was probably a 5 or a 6 at that time, which is a very low handicap, meaning he was a very good golfer. Another single-digit handicap name on that list stuck out, but I didn't recognize the name. It was Mac Divot. I asked the pro, "Who is Mac Divot?" He explained, "Well, that's Lee DeBeja playing left-handed." He had single-digit handicaps, right and left-handed. Lee used to frequently say, quote, "The rules are the rules are the rules," end quote, and he meant it. I played golf with him one time at Sand Creek Country Club. We played 18 holes in a light drizzle. On one hole, Lee just missed his putt, had a tap-in gimme left. When he swiped at that and missed the putt, he insisted on counting that stroke. At the end of the round, the score indicated Lee had shot 1 stroke over par in the rain. When I asked Lee how often he played that course, he said it's the first time. Lee had a good sense of humor. He clearly wrote his own obituary, which begins, and I quote, "Lee W. DeBeja, born March 22, 1937, and despite his protests, passed away on Friday, August 27, 2021. It pains him to admit it, but apparently he has passed away." For those of you who knew Lee, I hope these few observations bring back some good memories. For those of you who never did know Lee, I think that's a shame for you. I'm proud to say Lee DeBeja was my boss, my law partner, my mentor, and my friend. I miss you, Lee.
Thank you, Your Honor. Attorney Friedman. This is in regards to Barbara Friedman.
Hey, please, the court. Yeah, I want to thank the bar officers too for the effort to recognize this distinguished group that we're recognizing today, and also the gesture of adding Marilyn Jones. Our beloved Marilyn is an honorary member of the bar. Really well done. Get the opportunity to speak to you a little bit about Mom, who had a full life as a mother and parent before she became an attorney. Born in Chicago in 1935, the family moved here in the 60s when her dad, Charles Shapiro, started Universal Woodcrafters in LaPorte on State Street near the current LaPorte Hospital. Mom very much believed, as my dad did, in community service, in a public commitment that you've got primarily a commitment to do well for your community. She was very active in LaPorte Hospital Auxiliary. She started as a member of the Lincoln School PTA, the Block Parent Program, which was an early anti-bullying program that set up block parents on each block that kids who were victims of bullying could go to as a member of the Block Parent Program, which she started and became citywide. She was elected to the LaPorte School Board for 2 terms, served with great distinction on the LaPorte School Board, and then had the opportunity, after raising 4 kids, to go back to law school and get her law degree in 1982. And if you can imagine, here's a woman in her 40s crawling around the stacks at Valparaiso Law School, along with all these kids, getting herself a law degree and ultimately setting up a practice. And she did as much pro bono as anyone in this community, was very much committed to her clients, to making an impact. She's had a tremendous impact, certainly on my family, but she was a great role model, I think, to women, particularly at that time, because there were not a lot of women attorneys, certainly in the late 70s, early 80s. And she had gone back, as I say, and to be able to get a law degree in the early 80s, practiced successfully for 40 years. And worked with many of the folks in this room. She will be very much missed, and I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words today. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Friedman. May it please the court. I have the opportunity to present some remarks with regards to, I'm going to call him Bill, because that's how I knew him. Bill Hedge. His wife is here. He was a pillar of the community, and he was focused all the time. His office may not have looked like it, but he was, and I can kind of relate. He was sharp as a tack, and he always went above and beyond to drive through the issues and come to the rule of law. My fondest memory of him is when I lived just down the street from where his office was. I would take my dog out for a walk, and Bill would be out there in shorts and a t-shirt mowing the lawn every time of the day. And we'd wave, and he cared. He cared. And his heart was I can't even describe how big his heart was. When you got to know him and you got through the professional stuff with regards to, okay, are we antagonistic or whatever else, he became a friend. And I'm going to miss him. And I'm going to miss seeing him mowing the yard. Because, who is an attorney is mowing the yard at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with shorts on? But he cared about the appearance of his practice, and that, I think that kind of sums up who he was. He paid attention to detail, and with regards to his passing, we will miss him. He was very instrumental with government practice, with other things like that, and we will miss him. So. Nick Otis. This is in regards to Gene Jones.
Good morning. May it please the court. I'm going to go a little out of order here. I have three former members of Newby, Lewis, Kaminsky, and Jones, and I'd like to first address Perry Stump. Good morning. Perry Stump Jr. passed away on December 4th at the age of 88. Perry was born in Hammond, Indiana on November 14th, 1932, and on August 27th, 1955, he married his wife, Mamie, and they had 4 children. In 1951, Perry graduated from Hammond High School in Hammond, Indiana, and then he attended Indiana Central College, which is now known as University of Indianapolis, graduated in June of 1955. After graduating from Indiana Central, Perry attended Indiana University School of Law in both Bloomington and Indianapolis, and he actually began his career as a lawyer at Merchants National Bank in its trust department, and then Union Title Company as a title attorney. He was transferred to LaPorte in 1961 and became a manager and later president of LaPorte County Abstract Company. In March of 1968, he joined the law firm of Newby, Lewis, Kaminsky, and Jones, and then ultimately retired and practiced as a transactional attorney until December 31st of 2000, when he completely retired. In retirement, I frequently saw him at Beechwood Golf Course, and he was a big Cubs fan. And in doing a little research, I found a really cool picture from the 1970s. It seemed like a good, that was before my time, but of Perry and Gene Jones at one of our Christmas parties. Next, I want to speak on behalf of Gene Jones, and this was provided to me by his son Dave, who Dave is enjoying semi-retirement down in southern Indiana now, back where the Jones family started. Gene was born in 1939 on his grandfather's farm, and he grew up in Lost River Township in Martin County, Indiana. He attended Lagodi High School and graduated in 1957. Lettered in basketball and baseball, and he said he had 3 job choices after high school: farm with his dad, coal mine near Princeton, Indiana, or join the military. He opted for a 4th choice and went to Indiana University, and while he was at IU, he was drafted. In 1961, he graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts degree, combining his last year of college with his first year of law school, and received his law degree in 1963. That same year, he passed the bar exam and he left for military service. He began his legal career in the United States Air Force at Hill Air Force Base in Ogden, Utah. He was a member of the Judge Advocate of JAG Corps. While being asked by his kids what he did in the service, he said he flew a BMD in the war. Later, he revealed the BMT was a big mahogany desk. In 1966, he was honorably discharged as captain, and he began his civilian job search in Lake County and was headed eastward to South Bend, interviewing at the firm Thornburg, McGill, Deal, Harmon, Carey, and Murray, which eventually became Barnes & Thornburg. Fortunately, he got sidetracked by John Newby and Leon Kaminsky in LaPorte. He arrived just in time for the blizzard of 1967. He recalled that it doesn't snow like this in southern Indiana. He had joined Newby, Lewis, Kaminsky, which later became Newby, Lewis, Kaminsky, and Jones in the early 1970s, and practiced there for 43 years, retiring in 2009. He was a member of all the local bar associations. He was a member of the American Bar Association, the International Association of Defense Counsel, Indiana Defense Lawyers Association, and the American College of Trial Lawyers, in which he was inducted as a fellow in London, England in 1985. As I understand it, this is not from Dave Jones' notes, but this is from my understanding. In the 1980s, he was recognized as the Defense Trial Counsel of the Year in Indiana, while at the same time receiving one of the biggest plaintiff's verdicts that year as well. So he was a very excellent trial lawyer, along with Leon, who I will speak of next. Both Leon and Gene were excellent trial lawyers at a time when lawyers were frequently trying 1 or 2 cases a month, back before discovery rules applied, when you would just show up and try a case without knowing exactly what was going to happen. Obviously, many If you know Dave Jones, his son, who was a practicing lawyer here, he had other sons as well, one of whom was a lawyer and practiced at Guantanamo Bay for quite a period of time. So Gene was a well-respected lawyer. I worked with him for a couple years before he retired, and he passed away the same year as his longtime partner, Leon Kaminsky. I'd like to address Leon Kaminsky now. Leon was born in 1924 to Stanley and Stefania Kaminsky, who were both Polish immigrants. Leon graduated from LaPorte High School, where he excelled in debate, tennis, and loved all sports, including basketball. In high school, he developed a desire to become a lawyer, which led him to enroll at Indiana University, Bloomington. At IU, he was captain of the tennis team and manager of the basketball team. He excelled academically and then was admitted to IU Law School in Indianapolis, where he graduated in 1950. He returned to LaPorte and started his practice as a solo practitioner. He served as deputy prosecutor trying major felony cases and also developed a reputation as a civil trial lawyer. His skills caught the attention of John Newby and Dan Lewis Sr., and he joined them in private practice in 1958. His trial skills also caught the attention of numerous insurance companies, who often hired Leon as counsel to defend their insureds, and led to the rapid growth of Newby, Lewis, Kaminsky, and Jones. Leon was extraordinary in his service to the Bar Association. He served on the Indiana State Board of Law Examiners and became active in the State Bar Association, where he eventually was elected as president of the Indiana Bar Association in 1982. As far as we are aware, he's the only lawyer from LaPorte County to have ever served as the president of the Indiana State Bar Association. In addition to his service to the Indiana State Bar, he was elected to the American College of Trial Lawyers and later received many awards from the State Bar and Indiana University for his legal service to the legal profession. Leon married his wife Norma, a fellow law student, in 1950, and they had 6 children, including 3 who have become practicing attorneys, including my law partners Jim and Bill Kaminsky. Simply put, Leon loved the law, lawyers, and judges, and was truly a lawyer's lawyer. Now, this was provided to me by Jim. A couple comments. Personally, I have been involved with the Kaminsky family my entire life. I grew up with Leon's grandchildren, and now I'm partners with 2 of his sons. What is not mentioned in here, and we mentioned all of the sports that he played, was that Leon was born with a birth defect on his hand. He didn't have fingers on the one hand. And one of the things he did as a trial lawyer, and you learn as a trial lawyer to take advantage of anything that you're given, he was a defense lawyer. And as I understand it, back when he was practicing, it was contributory negligence, not comparative fault. So for those of you that didn't practice then or aren't familiar with that, if you're a plaintiff and you're in a car accident and you're 1% at fault, you get nothing. And Leon made it a point to hold up a piece of paper with his birth defect hand, and he would rip off just one piece of paper or one part of it. And if the plaintiff is this much at fault, they get nothing. And he would make sure to prominently display that, so that if a plaintiff was complaining about an injury that wasn't that significant, the jury would appreciate that, you can lead a very successful life even with a significant injury. And so I always try to find a way. You want to be successful as a trial lawyer, you can take advantage of anything you can, and that Leon found a way to always do that. And I bet between him and Gene, they had to have tried over 200 cases at least. And we learn as lawyers, you go to law school, but your real learning doesn't start till you become a practicing lawyer. And Leon and Gene have passed those things down at our firm, and I am forever indebted to both of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Otis. Barb Suchberry on behalf of Stephen Craig.
May it please the court.
Stephen Cray was born November 15, 1943 and passed on February 15, 2021. This was after a 3-year battle with melanoma. Stephen was survived by his wife, Barbara, and 4 stepchildren at the time of his death. He was a true dog whisperer, leaving behind his beloved office dog, Presley, and another Yorkie, Lilbit, and Blue Heeler, Coda. Stephen attended Sacred Heart Elementary, graduated from LaPorte High School and Indiana School of Law. He was admitted as an attorney and counselor of the U.S. Court of Appeals, the 7th Circuit. While his occupation was administrating social justice as a hardworking attorney, his true passion was gardening, as evidenced by the rock garden, waterfalls, and koi ponds at his longtime country club residence. Other interests were John Wayne and James Bond movies, reading ancient history and the classics, and his impeccable dress code. He found pleasure in attending Chicago theater productions and fine dining. His favorite destinations were European river cruises and Gulf of Mexico all-inclusive resorts. What I'd like to say personally is that his hair always came into the room before his body. He was a very nice, well-dressed man, and whenever I would have a case with him and give him my client's position or a legal position, he would just look at me and say, "Yes, Barbara." We're gonna miss you.
Thank you, Trans Experience. Happy Christ on behalf of Thomas Pulaski.
41 years ago, I came back here after having lived, gone to school, law school, and served in the military in Southern California. And while I grew up somewhat here, it was a foreign concept to come back into a town and try and set up a practice. Good friend was Don Transky of the family. He had represented our family for several years. Told him, I'm thinking about maybe staying here. I'm waiting for the California bar results. What can you tell me? He said, it's a tough town to get a start in as a young lawyer. He said, why don't you change your name, your last name? He said, we don't got that many prices here. He said, you're an art. He said, the only thing better than a kraut is a Pollock. I said, nah, I'm not going to do that. I said, but he says, well, get to know guys. He said, you know, some of us, and what he was talking about, and I soon came to find out, and some of you old enough to remember, some of these folks that I called gentleman lawyers, like Gene Havlin, Marty Meyer, C.T. Katowski, Don Martin, true gentlemen. He says, we'll help you. And he says, and get to know this guy that's in my office here, Tom Pulowski. He said, he's kind of on the cusp of being a gentleman lawyer. He says, but he said, so he introduced me to him. I got to know Tom quite well. Tom was a great, great mentor and a great sounding board. His door was always open. Any questions you had, he would take the time to address them. He indeed was a bridge, if you will, from those gentleman lawyers, from those years of days gone by, and kind of on the cusp, as indicated, of the newer generation, us baby boomers that were coming in to the practice of law in the early 70s and into the early 80s. Tom taught me a lot at the time, although at the time I didn't know that I was really learning it. That's the way he was. That's the effect and the way he communicated with people. As a prosecutor, Tom was always there in the middle of the night when I needed to find a judge now to get a search warrant. He would answer the phone at any time, say, come on over, I got the coffee on. He was a lexicon of information about not only the Michigan City Bar and its members, but various other public individuals and pillars of the community. He knew the backstory on everyone. We shared commonalities of military service, fishing, hunting, firearms. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about Tom, to this day, perhaps, is that he was quite an accomplished locksmith. He possessed an array of tools, precision tools, locks of all types, colors, and sizes, and functions, all of which had their own unique idiosyncrasies. Picking any lock demanded patience, and Tom defined patience. It was a trait which abounded with him. And that characteristic also carried over in his profession as a lawyer and then subsequently as a magistrate. It was manifest in all of his dealings with people, especially, and more importantly, when he sat on the bench as a magistrate. Every person that appeared in front of Tom Pulowski had a story to tell. And Tom was very adept at drawing that story out of them and understanding what their unique personality was, and understanding that that story about that litigant, whether they be a defendant or a victim, what they had to relate. He was a good friend. He was a good lawyer. He was a good magistrate. But he was a great mentor to me, and I believe a lot of other attorneys when I came into being in this town. And he was the guide star for me then, and he continues to be so today.
Thank you, Attorney Price. Okay, please support. This is in regards to Martin Olferts. I met Martin about 10 years ago, and I will always remember his gravelly voice and his penchant for wearing gray trench coats all the time, and his no-nonsense approach to law. He cut through the BS. He didn't want to deal with discovery issues. He didn't want to deal with that. He didn't want to deal with anything. He just wanted to cut down to the issue. And he had a practice in Michigan City with Catherine Saul Matthews, and they were very, very successful. Because I think what Martin was always doing is, again, I'm going to go back to what was said to me in law school. It's all about the rule of law. But then he was an accomplished trial attorney. He was very, very good with parsing details. And unfortunately, later on in his life and his career, he wound up succumbing to the need for dialysis 3 times a week. And he lost a ton of weight. But he looked great. He looked great. And he would still wear that same, excuse my language, damn trench coat every time I would see him. But when you saw him, he wouldn't just start talking shop. He wanted to know how you were doing. He wanted to know what was up. He wanted to know what the Cubs score was. I mean, whatever. I mean, it was not always about business, and it is a huge loss to the community because Martin was dedicated with what he did, how he did it, and who he did it for. And we'll miss him. Your Honor, Judge Ost, on behalf of Tony Miller.
Please support. Tony Walker Itiki. He took his African name shortly, I think, before his death and before he went to a trip to Africa. Passed away on October 26th of 2022 at the age of 55. He was a member of the LaPorte County Bar Association for at least 10 years. I think he came on when I was president, so it's been at least 10 years ago. While his practice was in Gary, he felt at home here with all of us in LaPorte County and was a regular attendee at our meetings. Tony received his law degree from DePaul University College of Law in Chicago. He clerked for the Indiana Supreme Court Justice Robert Rucker when he was a judge on the Indiana Court of Appeals, and served as legislative counsel for Congresswoman Julie Carson in Washington, D.C. before he went into private practice. Tony was a civil litigator, which is how I met him. We had a case together years ago, and we became fast friends. He was very passionate about his clients, right, Bev? And about the law. Tony was also passionate about making this world a better place. So he was very active in the community, both in Northwest Indiana and statewide. He served on the Indiana State Board of Education for 9 years, the Urban League of Northwest Indiana, Gary Police Foundation, Gary Public Library Board of Trustees, and the Second Chance Foundation. He also served on the Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission for 10 years. Tony was a kind and gentle soul, and he put his heart into everything that he did. He was generous with his time and was constantly encouraging others to get involved as well. He supported many along their journeys, including our mutual friend Leanna Weissman, who is now on the Indiana Court of Appeals. He was one of my biggest cheerleaders on my journey to the bench. Tony's greatest legacy, though, will be his children, Miles, Ethan, and Brandon. Those boys were his pride and joy. I tried to keep this short so I wouldn't cry. At Christmas every year, I looked forward to receiving his Christmas cards so that I could see how much they had grown and changed. When I went to his memorial service, I was so impressed at how they handled themselves, so grown up, among all of the dignitaries and hundreds of people who were there to pay their respects. It was clear that Tony and his wife had raised some phenomenal young men, and I can't wait to see who they become. Tony was an attorney, an activist, a radio host and producer, advisor and counselor, mentor and colleague. But most importantly, he was a friend to all who knew him, and he was my friend. He is and will continue to be greatly missed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Attorney Price, in regards to the honorary bar member, Marilyn Jones.
I can't thank you all enough for recognizing Marilyn in this fashion, because vicariously, I think she thought she was one of you. There wasn't a bar meeting that I wouldn't come home from where she demanded to know, who did I sit with and what did you talk about? 41 years ago, as I indicated, I moved back here from California. I was a young 29-year-old defense attorney in Don Horner's Superior Court Number 2, where from almost the first time there, I became quite smitten with this attractive, dark-haired court reporter. Unsuccessfully, numerous times, I asked her to go out with me. She finally relented. We eventually became a true item after about 6 months. Lots of other single attorneys and single law enforcement officers were perplexed at how I pulled this off. Well, what they didn't know was, number one, I sought and won her mother's approval first. And two, I helped her to proofread, bind, and deliver deposition transcripts. Marilyn had numerous career milestones. It would take me a long time to enunciate all of them, but she worked for 3 different judges, one being Art Keppen. Most of you in this room know how many stories would go along with that. Imagine being the court reporter who had to report everything that happened in that courtroom. She left being an official court reporter after 15 years, working for 3 different judges, Judge Keppen, Judge Harner, and Judge King, to form the Freelance Association of Marilyn M. Jones and Associates, of which, by my count, there were at least 10 associates over the years that she trained in that ensuing 25 years. The last one, she's here today, sitting in the back row, named Becky Lempa. Marilyn believed her to be a sister by another mother, and thus entrusted the future of her ongoing operation of the reputation that she had built. During that 42-year plus career, she encountered a lot of people. She did depositions and reported on in court. I remember one day she came home and she said, "Hey, you'll never guess who I deposed today." I said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Yeah, you know that riverboat over in Lake County?" I said, "Yeah." "Which one?" She told me the name. And she said, "I sat next to the entire day, got to know, and swore him in and took the deposition of Donald Trump." I said, "Wow." She came home another day and she gave me a napkin. It was a scrawl of a sailboat and a beach and the sun and so forth. She says, "You know who did that?" I flipped it over and I said, "Well, I see an M, but that's about all." She said, well, so I spent the day taking the deposition of Muhammad Ali. She said, he's quite the character. She deposed a lot of different people. Rock stars like the Smashing Pumpkins here locally, Ted Nugent, she got to know him. She was a 3-term state president of the Indiana Court Reporters Association. She, in this area, if not northern Indiana, certainly northwest Indiana, was the first CAT reporter, computer-aided transcription, back in the 80s. As a result of that, and that training and certification that she received, she did numerous death penalty cases in Indiana and Michigan, where real-time reporting and daily copy were required. She was one of the first court reporters cross-trained and certified as also being a videographer in the state of Indiana. She is responsible for the case of Jones versus Besh, and it is relied upon to this day by court reporters around the state who think that it's not the attorney's responsibility to pay the court reporter's fee. Court of Appeals said otherwise. Most importantly, she, through her love and support, validated me every day. You were a stranger but once to her. She possessed the uncanny ability to form lasting impressions with members of our profession, not only locally, but across the country. Late in his career, most of us, some of us, that are my age or maybe even a little younger, remember a gentleman by the name of Hilbert Bradley. When I was a chief deputy, somewhere in this building, I don't know where it is now, Hilbert stopped by my office, and I thought, well, he came to see me. And so I thought, well, I don't have any cases with him, he just wants to chew the fat. After a couple of minutes, he said, oh no, Atlee, I'm not here to talk to you, don't take it personally. He said, I'm here to inquire about how your sweet wife is getting along. Another person that she hit it off with to this day I will never understand. All of you who know or ever had the experience of appearing in front of Judge Moody, you know that his name fit him well. Judge Moody's wife started a court reporting school. She sought Marilyn's input and advice a lot. So much so that one night we were invited to a rather formal dinner party at Judge Moody's house with several distinguished people and residents from Chicago and Northwest Indiana. During that time, Marilyn spills a glass of red wine on this absolutely white carpet. All 15 or 20 of the guests at that point, including me, who were also familiar with his demeanor, were sympathetically mortified on Marilyn's behalf. But Judge Moody paid no attention to it. He rushed over and devoted the entire attention. Are you all right? Are you all right? Let me get you another glass of wine. What kind of wine is it? I was like, what kind of drugs am I on? What am I watching right here? Since November of 2022, a literal retinue of caring medical professionals and specialists at Northwestern Medicine in Chicago allowed her 14 months of hope, of strength and resolve to wage a fight which indeed Muhammad Ali himself would have been proud of. That struggle continued until a month ago. Just 2 weeks prior to her passing, she insisted on reporting a rather complicated case with the deponent rendering remote testimony from another country. And upon the completion of that deposition, her sense of humor once again shone through when she uttered, "What did the dying court reporter say after their last deposition?" To which she blurted out, "That's all she wrote." I can only speak for the 2 other individuals in Maryland that I've granted the privilege to memorialize today. But I truly believe, and this is true for not only those individuals, but for everybody that's been addressed here today. These people are the folks that define us, these other lawyers, all of them. Their noble actions, their wise words, their well intentions, they made you and I who we are. They compel us to do better, treasure them, honor them, aspire to grow beyond them. If they touched you, if they are inside you, they indeed are still ours. The only things you ever really have are those which we hold inside of our hearts. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Our keynote speech will be presented today by the Honorable William Boakland. It is just what does freedom of speech really mean? The Honorable Judge Boakland is our keynote speaker and was first appointed as the LaPorte County Superior Court number 4 judge in 1993, elected in 1996, and re-elected in 2002 and 2008. He graduated from Purdue University with distinction in 1973 and received his Doctor of Jurisprudence from Valparaiso University in 1977. He was in private practice and served as a LaPorte County Deputy Prosecuting Attorney from 1977 until his appointment to the bench in 1993. And he also served as senior judge after his, quote, retirement. It's my honor and privilege to announce Judge William Boakland and his speech, Just What Does Freedom of Speech Mean?
Good afternoon or morning, wherever we are now. I now have the difficult job of following all of those eloquent memorials. I'm reminded of what comedians used to say, don't ever follow an act with kids and animals. This is worse even yet, I think. And then Judge Thorne triggered my speech before it was ready. I have technology, and you know, with technology, something will always go wrong. And when asked to do this, I wasn't sure what I would want to talk about until I watched what's been going on in the country for the last couple of weeks.
It's been an upsetting week on American college campuses. Clashes with armed police. Mass arrests of students and outsiders. Locked campus gates. The firestorm began on April 17th when a congressional committee grilled Columbia University President Minouche Shafik about anti-Semitism at student protests against the war in Gaza.
Anti-Semitism has no place on our campus, and I am personally committed to doing everything I can to confront it directly.
She promised to crack down on the protesters, and she did.
Bro, what Rick said, I'm just standing on the sidewalk.
The Columbia News enraged students on other campuses nationwide. For many college administrators, it's a no-win situation.
Campuses are supposed to be areas for free speech. We have an unwavering and absolute commitment to free speech. But the university, like all public institutions, is allowed to have time, place, and manner rules, meaning the right to free expression is not absolute. You can't interfere with or disrupt the operations of the university.
And that's the problem. Many colleges say that the protests violate those time and place rules and make other students feel unsafe, including Skylar Saradsky, a senior at George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
I was here a little bit earlier with a few of my friends holding the Israeli flag that I'm now wearing, and I got spit at. We got middle fingers from some people.
We took over a campus administration building. We occupied it, moved the deans out of the building.
As a self-described radical at Harvard in the 60s, Michael Kazin protested the Vietnam War. Today, he teaches the history of social movements at Georgetown University in Washington. Do you look back fondly on your protest days?
We felt we were changing history. In some ways we were. And that's a thrill. One of the reasons I became a historian is because I was involved in these movements.
Are there any ways that the current conflict is different from the previous ones?
Well, the most important one for Vietnam is that American soldiers are not fighting. American planes are not bombing Gaza.
Another difference? This time, the students aren't unified against a common enemy.
The Middle East is unique in that it divides the campus community. It sets student against student, faculty member against faculty member. And then all of that is fueled in a way it never was in the past by social media.
So what exactly do these protesters want?
As I watch these various coverage of all these things, I'm reminded of an old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. We do, folks. I think we all know that. I grew up in interesting times, and I'm here to give you a little perspective on an old adage that history repeats itself. And some say it doesn't, some say it just rhymes, but it's close enough. Before my interesting times, I was 9 years old when John F. Kennedy was elected the youngest president in the history of the country. His administration came to be known as Camelot, and that was after a Broadway musical that was playing at that time, an idealized society of King Arthur and his round table. Now, Kennedy and his team understood the optics of television more than anybody at that time did. His wife was beautiful, and he had her by his side every chance he could. They had 2 young children who were photographed playing in his office while he was working. Whether that happened, I can't say, but they were photographed there. These 2 were both very privileged and very wealthy people, but they were able to relate to common people very well. And they did it through the magic of television. Fortunately for him, and probably all of us, the press did not expose John Kennedy's secret life. They didn't do that then. But then he gave them a lot of stuff to go with. He did his own press conferences. And I'm a 9 or 10-year-old kid, and I look forward to watching the presidential press conference. I didn't know anything about the issues, but I loved the man's humor. And he would kibitz with reporters and get them to laugh. And it was all a very idealistic thing for me. I'm just not even a teenager yet. He also had an incredible charisma. He could draw your attention without speaking a word. He at times would demonstrate himself also to be a capable leader. I didn't know much about that, but I did know that there were 14 days in October of 1962 where the world was on the cusp of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. And somehow, he and Nikita Khrushchev managed to reconcile it. We didn't learn till 50 years later how, but it looked like a victory for both of them. The interesting times began on November 22nd, 1963. That day is a day where everything in this country and in the world changed. It started off, I was getting ready for school and somebody had the radio on and I heard that the president was going to Dallas, Texas to campaign. And I didn't think much of that. I mean, a campaign, I knew that. But this was different. They suspected problems in Dallas. And it wasn't until lunchtime for me at school that I got any wind of what had happened. It had been a strange day in school because there was so much chatter in classrooms. And we got into the lunchroom, and before I got there, I was at my locker getting my lunch, and 2 girls passed behind me in the hall, and one was crying, and the other said something about president and shot. And I didn't know what it was. I wouldn't find out until my next hour class after lunch. Midway through that class, somebody came up from the office and handed a note to the teacher. And the teacher said, "We've been informed that the president has been shot. We don't know how serious it is. We don't know where he was shot. But then they told us we're going to send you home." And that's all we got. I would not learn what happened completely until I got home. And I had a 2-mile walk to get home, so it was a while, and I was concerned. And when I got home, the most trusted man in America was on our television.
from Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
When Walter Cronkite told you something, you knew you could count on it. It was true. And now it went from he was shot to he was dead. And in my 9-year-old mind, I couldn't figure out if now the family was going to be able to stay in the White House without him, and I still know Jackie and the kids are going to have to leave, and the new president will go there. And the new president was a man named Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was sworn in on Air Force One before he left. And to make matters even more difficult for interesting times, this man that you're looking at, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been arrested as a suspect in the murder of John Kennedy. But as he was being escorted out of a police holding cell to the regular jail for safekeeping, a man with a .38 stepped forward and shot him in the abdomen. Lee Harvey Oswald would die from the wound. And that means we would never get the complete story. And as you've probably heard, it's fading now, but for years there were all kinds of theories of who killed Kennedy and why. And part of it's this: we never had a trial. Well, Lyndon Johnson was a very different person from John Kennedy. These two men didn't like each other at all. And though they acted as if they did, they didn't trust each other. And it was a case of political strange bedfellows. They used each other to get where they were. Lyndon Johnson was not charming. He was not handsome. He did not have a great sense of humor. He had absolutely no charisma at all. And he did not make people feel comfortable. In fact, he tried to make them feel uncomfortable. It was called the Johnson treatment, and all the senators knew when he was the head of the Senate what it was like. One of his victims said the tone of the treatment was this: he would get in your personal space so close you could smell it. And then it was supplication, accusation, cajolery, exuberance, scorn, tears, complaint, and always just a hint of a threat. Often, he said, it was all of these together, so it really had your head rolling. Johnson was a master politician. He ruled the Senate when he was there with an iron hand. But he was not a typical Southern politician. He had a goal. He wanted to outdo Franklin Roosevelt with progress in the country. He's the one who pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act. He's the one who signed Medicare into law. He called it the Great Society. But he had one thing, like often a tragic hero in a story will have. He had one obstacle standing in his way. And he had inherited from John Kennedy, who had inherited from Dwight Eisenhower, who had inherited it from Harry Truman, and it may have gone back as far as Franklin Roosevelt, the war in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. And Johnson did what a government leader should do. He consulted his generals, he consulted his cabinet, he consulted anybody who might have some information on this. And he determined that in order to win the war, he had to apply overwhelming force, which meant he had to begin a very intensive bombing campaign in North Vietnam. And even more important, he had to expand the draft. In 1963, when he became president, there were 16,000 soldier advisors in Vietnam. In 1968, there were over 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam, American soldiers. And as you might guess, this divided America, not unlike what we're seeing on these college campuses. What he did separated right down to households what people wanted. 1968, was the year of the most interesting times in my youth. On March 31, 1968, President Johnson would make an announcement on television, and that was nothing surprising for him. He started to use it.
With America's sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
With that speech, he sucked all the political air out of the room. It came as a surprise. People wanted it, some looked for it, but when it actually happened, it was surprising. 3 days after he gave that speech, Martin Luther King Jr. was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he was there to march with some striking sanitation workers. The night before the march, he gave a speech at a church, and his initial comments, he addressed the First Amendment rights.
If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over that. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
Well, what Martin Luther King said there was my idea of what the First Amendment was about. Freedom of speech, like this picture here. Norman Rockwell painted these during World War II. This is one of the 4 freedoms, freedom of speech. When he closed the speech, he closed them with some really eerie comments and some foreboding.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I don't know if King knew something or suspected something was coming. His people said no, he didn't. He just ended it that way. And within 24 hours of him finishing that speech, Martin Luther King was out on the balcony of the hotel he was staying at with some of his friends. And he was shot dead by an assassin from across the parking lot. At that point, major cities across the nation erupted into riots and fire. Well, as you might guess, with all this going on, politics was a real mess, and the Democratic Party especially was just a hot mess. Lyndon Johnson, at the time of the New Hampshire primary, which was the first one of the year, was not running. He wasn't on the ballot. There was only one name on the ballot. But he got write-in votes. And with only write-in votes, he managed to defeat the declared peace candidate, a relatively unknown senator named Eugene McCarthy. And when that happened, Vice President Humphrey got on the ballot, representing the position of Johnson, figuring he might be able to win. But after that election, he never participated in a single primary election. The system was different then. You could go caucuses, primary, or vote both. I can't explain it, I have no idea. But all he did was caucuses. Seeing what had happened to McCarthy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy Sr. entered. He was relatively well known from his brief time in the White House when his brother was president. And he also was a sort of peace candidate, I could say. It was really soft on peace. But these two guys were competing for the same block of voters. That looked like an easy path for Hubert Humphrey. But Bobby Kennedy had a strategy. He was going through the primaries. And I'm glad you're all seated. Well, all but one. Back in those days, Indiana was a swing state. And it leaned mostly Democrat. And Bobby's strategy was to win the primary in Indiana and win it big. And he came to here. He came to Michigan City. He came to the high school where I was going, and we all met Bobby Kennedy. And McCarthy as well. And his plan was win Indiana and run the table. And he had done it right up to California. And California had an all or nothing primary. And if you know what that means they don't distribute the votes based upon percentage. If you won by one vote, you got them all. So he had all the delegates from California. A little after midnight on June 5, Robert F. Kennedy was declared the winner of the California primary. He was that close to securing the nomination. And he closed his victory speech with this: "Now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there." That was the last stop on Kennedy's train. Well, the crowd was huge, and it was well after midnight, and they wanted to clear the hall, and Kennedy asked people to leave, and they still milled around. So because there were so many people, he and his entourage had to leave through the kitchen, out the back door. And on his way through the kitchen, Bobby Kennedy was gunned down by an assassin. And a little after 1 a.m., he was declared dead. So now, the Democrat primary was with two candidates. And after Bobby left, another senator jumped in who was sort of a peace candidate. His name was George McGovern. But as you can tell, if you follow it at all right now, this is so disorganized and so unlevel that nobody would know who would end up on top. And again, the peace candidates had to get 2 votes for every one that Humphrey would need to be nominated. The next stop was the Democratic National Convention. And this is the event that changed everything about primary elections. Everything changed because of what would happen here. And I have a video that I'd like you to watch because you've seen the videos of the student demonstrations now. This was more than that.
Thus, the night that Vice President Humphrey was to receive the Democratic Party's nomination for president was also the night of the bloodiest confrontation. Denied a permit to march to the amphitheater, they gathered in Grant Park, across the street from the now hated Hilton Hotel. The television mobile units, ordered a block away from the Hilton Hotel by Secret Service agents for security reasons, would be unable to shoot the initial provocation, which authorities later claimed started the bloody battle at Balboa and Michigan Avenue. But whatever the reason, a clash did occur, and this is what it looked like. It speaks for itself.
situation. The poor people had a permit, and that's why they were allowed to get through. And I asked one of the poor people, and he said, I'm just a field marshal, I don't know. But I think it must have been because we applied for a permit. Now, you may have heard the yelling before. The others all feel that if they get out into the group section where
in the arrests now, the police seem to be regrouping. And now moving on down Balboa Street, and the crowd is running, and the police are taking them into Jackson, into Grant Park. This, once again, is at the corner of Balboa and Michigan Avenue, in the heart of downtown Chicago. There is an odor of tear gas still left in the air here from tear gas shells that have been going off periodically for the last hours.
Well, that's what we saw on television the night before. And the next morning, I was about to go off to my junior year in high school, and I always had breakfast with my grandmother. I grew up in an extended family, so she was part of the household. And we watched this while we were eating breakfast. And I knew what I'd seen on television. I had some really strong opinions about what was going on there. And I was telling her these opinions, and she said, "You can say what you think in this room. I won't say anything. But out there, they will punish you for it if they don't like what they hear." And I said, "Grandma, now, I learned in government class how it works. I learned about the First Amendment. I'd heard Martin Luther King describe the same thing I thought I'd learned. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech." It was a shield. But what I didn't know was my grandmother had seen a very different kind of America years earlier. She was 68 before I was born, so she was very old as grandmothers go. But she had seen something in America that was quite different from what I had seen. Part of it revolved around, again, a close election. That always seems to be part of interesting times. The incumbent, Woodrow Wilson, was the peace candidate. The war candidate was Charles Evans Hughes, who had stepped down from the Supreme Court to run. And this, at that point, at the time in history, was the closest presidential election in history to that point. Literally, the newspaper coverage went back and forth, first declaring Hughes the winner, then declaring it was close, then declaring Wilson the winner, and finally, the party, Hughes's party, the Republicans, had vowed to challenge the election. And they started to. The date of the election was November 7, and it wasn't until the 23rd of the month that Hughes conceded. Against his party's wishes, he said, "For the sake of the country, this has to be resolved." The nation was, with an election like that, equally divided. And the peace candidate was elected. And within 30 days of being inaugurated as president, the peace candidate went to Congress asking for a declaration of war. So now his own people were being betrayed by him. A thing called jingoism started up. Don't know if you know what the term means. It is a fanatical, extreme form of patriotism. And the state of Montana, you don't think of Montana as a place for a political hotbed, but it became one. They made a sedition act out there because they didn't like what the Germans were saying. It was really an ethnic fight, but their sedition law would prohibit and punish saying or printing anything disloyal, scurrilous, or abusive about the government. The lawyers in here know that's pretty vague language. Saying or doing anything to bring the armed forces into contempt, scorn, or disrepute. One guy said, our guys are dying like flies over there. And he was prosecuted and convicted of sedition. Anything curtailing the production of any goods necessary to the prosecution of war. So even just demonstrating it, even just writing it in your diary, if someone found it, would be enough to bring you in. This worked for a business out there that had a clear ulterior motive. It was called Anaconda Copper Mining. It was the 7th most valuable business in the world at that time. And they had some terrible, horrible labor practices. If you worked for Anaconda, you worked a 10-hour shift, 6 days a week. You got no breaks. So if you had to eat, you ate while you mined. If you had to go to the bathroom, you went where you were. There were no breaks. Anaconda also, with its money, got a lot of influence in the legislature. And though slavery was clearly illegal at that time, they were able to get convicts, especially espionage and sedition convictions, as slave labor for Anaconda Mine. And finally, saying or writing anything favoring the cause of any country with which the United States was at war. That meant all the German people who thought they elected a president who would stay out of it and grumped about it could end up in prison. And it didn't matter if anybody heard it or anybody read it. So like I said, somebody could find your diary, and if they wanted to put you behind bars, they simply bring it to the officials and you'd be charged. Not very long after Montana set up a law like this, the United States government adopted one as well. Now, I didn't know this, but there had been no cases concerning the meaning of the term freedom of speech in the history of the country leading up to the time in 1918 and 1919. It never came up. So they went back to William Blackstone, and he was an authority on law in England a couple hundred years earlier, kind of laid down the rules, and since we had no law, we went back to the mother country for it. And he said of it, every free man has an undoubted right to lay what sentiments he pleases before the public. To forbid this is to destroy the freedom of speech. But if he publishes what is improper, mischievous, or illegal, he must take the consequence of his own temerity. Well, that translates into this. You can say it. You can say whatever you want if you want to say it. But they can punish you for it if they do not like what you said. I can hear my grandmother, her voice echoing in my ears. The First Amendment was not a shield like I thought. The First Amendment was a sword for the government to be able to protect itself with. Well, World War I would end, and when the fighting stopped, most sedition offenders would be released, and sedition laws would be repealed. And in the next 50 years, cases would come before the Supreme Court. And they would be the standard would be described by any number of things: clear and present danger, bad tendency, that kind of thing. It moved around a lot. but it never substantially moved forward to anything else. In 1968, when my grandmother told me to keep my big mouth shut, you can say it, they can punish you for it, was the law. Free speech was still a sword and not a shield. But all that was about to change with the case of Brandenburg versus Ohio 1 year later. So in the end, just what does freedom of speech really mean? In most nations, it means exactly what Blackstone said it meant. You might remember that Martin Luther King, when he was talking about Russia and China, said they didn't commit themselves to free speech. That was not true. Both of those nations had a provision in their constitution guaranteeing the right to free speech. It was just used as a sword. You can say it, they can punish you for it. The United States, the meaning of that term, freedom of speech, is a little more fluid. It's capable of change, and I think that's largely because, at least in theory, we have a Supreme Court that is removed from politics and able to read those things, read the culture, and do what should be done with a term like freedom of speech. And if this is the full spectrum of possible political speech, Brandenburg did this. It drew a new line. It said this is not an issue between speech and action. It is in between mere advocacy and advocacy that incites to imminent lawlessness. That is the current standard as of today, which would plant the line right about there, in kind of a pink area. But in 1969, when that was decided, the Supreme Court was a very liberal institution. Today, that can't be said about it. It is more of a conservative institution now. And a conservative justice's philosophy is called textualism. And the definition of that is the terms mean what they meant when they were adopted. In other words, if they chose to, if the right case came up, they could wind it back over to here again. You can say it, but they can punish you for it. At least now, people would know if they did that. But what do you think that they would do with these current demonstrations right now? Would they fit within the Brandenburg test? I'm not going to speculate. I don't know what they're going to do. But if it's advocacy that incites to imminent lawless acts, it is not protected speech. And that's it. With this admonition, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I won't ask you, from your little watching of a couple videos, if you think anybody has learned from the past. But you might imagine I've gone through a lot of videos, and I have an opinion who learned from the past: law enforcement. If you watch the videos now, you will see them reacting, not proacting. The Chicago police during the Democratic Convention, that law enforcement action was called a police riot. Mayor Daley didn't like that, but it was a police riot. I think if you watch these, if you know, in your spare time, if you got 5 minutes, you're watching the news and it jumps on, watch where the aggression comes from, and that's probably what will happen. And with that, I thank you for your attention and turn it back over to Barb.
Thank you so much. As always, a wonderful presentation by Judge Boakland. Next is the Liberty Bell Award. The LaPorte County Bar Association selects the recipient of the Liberty Bell Award, and it's given to a resident of LaPorte County who has promoted a better understanding of the rule of law, encouraged a greater respect for law and the courts, stimulated a sense of civic responsibility, and contributed to good government in our community. This year, the LaPorte County Bar Association selected the Honorable William Boakland as the 2024 Liberty Bell Award recipient. To present the award, I introduce Judge Jeffrey Thorne, Attorney Shaw Friedman, and Judge Greta Friedman.
So I get to follow the kids in the Animal Act. Well done, Judge. I first met Judge Boakland, then known as Bill, shortly after I began practicing law in 1978. Bill was a deputy prosecuting attorney in the 4D office, involved in establishing and collecting child support orders. In representing clients who had gotten behind in child support or were facing the entry of a support order pursuant to a paternity action, I had dealings with Bill. While Bill was diligent in enforcing child support orders, he was also a person that would sit down and listen to reason. And my clients came up with some dandy reasons. In any event, one Friday morning we were meeting on a case and the conversation went to what was then a new craze in Michigan City, the sport of racquetball. We had each played a little bit and decided we would play each other on a Friday afternoon, which we did at the Northwest Athletic Club. Afterwards, we had lunch at Godfather's Pizza and found that we both had an interest in video games. Understand, we're talking about first-generation video games, including Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Frogger. We did this for several weeks and eventually decided that we really didn't have time to play racquetball and do lunch and do video games, so we dropped the racquetball. This practice went on virtually every Friday afternoon, and at some point during the spring, summer, and fall months, we began going to Redimax in New Buffalo. One sleepy Friday afternoon, Bill and I had the pleasure of meeting the late boxer Muhammad Ali. I would say that 75% to 80% of the Friday afternoons between 1980 and 1993, Bill and I had lunch together. We had our differences. Bill was a Democrat, I was a Republican. Bill was a Purdue grad, I was an IU grad. Bill lived in LaPorte, I lived in Michigan City. We had our debates, but I never remember any degree of animosity between us. Bill was the exception that proved the rule, that he was a reasonable and objective Purdue fan. When Bill was appointed as a judge of LaPorte Superior Court number 4 in 1993, his availability to meet for lunch and as an attorney practicing in Superior 4, we decided that we would forego our long-standing lunch date. Bill retired from the bench in 2014, which was the year I took the bench, and since then we have stayed in touch and gotten together several times at various judicial meetings. Judge Boakland is also unique in that I believe he's the first Law Day recipient, at least since 1978, who was an attorney or who was actively involved in the local legal community. Bill's nomination for the Law Day Award did not come from his accomplishments as an attorney or a judge. This award is given to Judge Boakland for his service to the community at large through his entertaining and educational presentations. Bill has spoken to any number of groups, including judges and members of the public at large. His presentations, as you now know, are extremely well researched, pardon me, and presented, and always have a basis in historical and legal issues. And it is my pleasure to call Judge William Boakland, my colleague and friend.
May it please the court.
Yes, want to reference one of the things, you talk about instruction, an instructional person. One of the things Bill Boakland is known for was his career as a teacher at Purdue North Central. I mean, this is a man who has brought so many students in our community to an understanding of history, of civics, of political science. I had the opportunity to come to work for Bill as an associate in 1984. Eric Yount was practicing with Bill. We became Boakland, Yount, and Friedman. Judge Thorne mentioned his service as a deputy prosecutor. Very few people understand or remember the fact it was Bill Boakland who built the Child Support Office into this tremendous source of support for custodial parents who needed support. And I got to tell you a story in terms of Bill and a tradition that he started, which continued up to the time that he retired. He made sure at the holidays to get out a score of rule to show cause so that a bunch of deadbeat dads would come to the courthouse on the 22nd, 23rd, and yes, even on Christmas Eve, to make sure that those deadbeat dads would pony up money so that in fact kids and their mothers would have money over the holidays. And you know what, there were a lot of stories told. The judge talked about the reasons and explanations given by some of his clients. Well, Bill had no tolerance for that. In fact, he would quote Scrooge from A Christmas Carol, and he said, "Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons? You tell me you're going to pony up and pay that child support." And there were scores of parents, of moms who received child support even as the Christmas bells were ringing outside. Bill Bolton made sure that that child support office was one of the top collectors in the state of Indiana, and I think we all owe a debt of gratitude for what he built in terms of that office. So I will turn it over to my spouse with some of her recollections, having served under me.
I had the opportunity to work in Shaw's office prior to working with Judge Boakland. And there is a difference, there's a learning curve going from that side to that side as an attorney. So of course I came to Judge Boakland as his magistrate, and I said, "Can you give me some tips? Can you give me some ideas?" I still have the list. It's entitled Words of Wisdom from WJB. It's their problem, not yours. Don't make it your problem. You are always right. If you are not, someone else will fix the mistake. Take good notes and make a good record. Decide and move on to the next issue in order to keep your head above water. And I know we have all tried to do that. He said, "Gret, I got something else for you. The Handbook for Judges." I thought, ooh, this could be helpful. So I opened up, and indeed, Bill knew what he was doing. The top definitions of what it means to be a judge. Being a judge means having self-confidence without conceit, decisiveness without arrogance, passion without pretension. Being a judge means using common sense as well as the law to handle problems. Being a judge means being temperate under circumstances that at times would try the patience of the most serene. Being a judge means being civil to those who are uncivil. Being a judge means using your awesome judicial power sparingly and with restraint. Being a judge means accepting criticism, justified or unjustified, without always being able to respond. Being a judge means being not afraid to make mistakes. Being a judge means having confidence in the system that mistakes will be corrected and that justice is attainable. Being a judge means recognizing that the great principles upon which this country was founded and endures apply not just to the best of us, but to the worst of us, to all of us. And finally, being a judge means accepting the responsibility to represent the justice system at your very best and to exhibit patience, tolerance, and understanding. And I think those of you, all of us who know Judge Boakland, know that those apply to him. It has been an honor to sit and listen to Judge today. I've heard various iterations of that, and it gets better every time. So, thank you.
With that, on behalf of the bar, present the Liberty Bell, a well-deserved award to Judge Boakland.
As you know, you'll get your award.
I know.
Would you like to say a few words?
I'll say a few.
Okay.
Thank you all. Please be seated. I haven't said that in a long time. I don't have anything prepared. I was sitting down when I heard about this, and I was real glad because I didn't think I would remain standing. I could feel my knees go out when I've heard it. This is, to me, is the highest honor I can get. This is the recognition from my colleagues and my peers. And I didn't think I qualified. I looked at this and I thought you couldn't be a lawyer. And well, I think they tweaked it around a ways. Anyway, I'm thrilled with it. I have to agree with everything that's been said about me by these two. Judge Thorne and I were notoriously good at video games, much better than we were at racquetball. And one time I went with my family to Godfather's, and there were a bunch of teenage kids playing our favorite game, Crystal Castles. And I thought, I want to get a shot at it again. I mean, all of the initials on all of the best scores were mine and his. And these kids are going, that old guy wants to play this game. What's he doing? Well, I came up, I entered my initials, and I heard this, that's WJB. And they start looking around, are you really WJB? And I said, yes, I am. Kind of old for this, aren't you? Well, they says, JLT here. No, not tonight. Oh, it was like being a celebrity there. And the other thing I need to comment on, Shaw's comments about Christmas Eve. I was known for the Christmas Eve collection. I could collect $100,000 in delinquent support in one morning. These were the worst of the worst, and you guys and ladies all know this kind of person. They act like they can't rub two nickels together, but they live a real good lifestyle. Well, in those days, First National Bank was right across from the courthouse, and they played Christmas carols all through the Christmas season. And they'd be playing God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. And I would be asking the judge to jail this guy until he paid the whole amount. And they'd go, but this is Christmas! I say, and the judge would go, yeah, it's Christmas for your kids too. And the sheriff learned to play part of a role in it too, because they wore their heavy boots with the hobnails, and they had the chains. Instead of taking the elevator up, they'd walk up the stairs with the chains rattling. Everybody waiting in that hall would go, oh, jeez. Well, I did the worst case first because I knew what would happen. The next case would be called, somebody would run up and ask for give me 10 minutes, I can get the money. So, be back in 10 minutes. Most of them never went. Well, I won't bore you with any more stories, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to thank Judge Oss and her staff for hosting this year's Law Day. We really appreciate your generosity, and I know it took a lot to get to today. Vice President Andrew Volz, who had to go cover Judge Thorne's court call, he already left, and Secretary and Treasurer Tara Wortley for the assistance in planning this event. To all our attendants, the LaPorte County Bar Association appreciates your attendance today, and we hope to see you next year. With that, Judge Oss.
Thank you everybody for attending. This joint session is now adjourned.